Mom Jeans podcast. I'm Nicole. Shelby is not here today, so we are talking to Laurie.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Doing great.
We got to talk to you on the pod about kind of part of your professional experience, but you, during the pandemic or right before the pandemic, went into kind of the therapy realm, like the real one.
During the pandemic. So I started in August of 2020.
Hey, that's when I got pregnant. I don't know why. That's important for me to state.
Hey, I mean, dates come to mind. Yeah.
They do. They really
Um,
do. What made
yeah.
you pivot? Is it because of the pandemic and you could do telehealth? I know that happened with a lot of people, or was there something else kind of bringing it?
It really was because of the pandemic. I had honestly been attempting to get into pediatric oncology as a
Wow, what a
medical
pivot.
social worker. Yes, as a medical
Yeah.
social worker. So it still would have been a lot of therapy, right? Like it
Yeah.
maybe not in name, but that's what you're doing, right? You're helping
Oh,
people
yeah.
navigate the medical system and providing a lot of family support during a difficult time.
I always
Um,
wanted to be a child life specialist, but they
oh,
really prefer you to have a different path of education and professional walking than I have had. And so
yeah,
like I could have paid a lot to get those extra stuffs. But then by then I had a family and I was like, it's fine.
right. And when I had learned about that specific thing, it was like too late for me. Right? Like I was already
Exactly.
like, well, social work's so open and I can move, move
Yeah.
around, which is not necessarily my goal, but I knew if I ever got, which is why I chose social work, if I ever got burnt out in a specific spot or with
Yes.
working with a specific population, I had the freedom to move somewhere else. And that was the whole
That's
reason I chose social
exactly.
work.
Yeah, that's where I was too. Like
Yeah.
child psychology, you can work with children in all of the different versions.
Right.
We used to say at the shelter that if you got burnt out, you could jump to a different trauma specialty,
Right.
which is
Right. And
which is
that's what it
really
is, right?
sad. Yeah, it's really sad, but it's true. Like you can
Right.
pivot, if you can't handle any human trafficking cases right now, pivot to domestic violence, or pivot, around
Right.
here so that you are using your skills. You are still helping populations
Right.
that need you, but you yourself are no longer having dreams about it.
Right. And that's what
Hopefully.
I think it's so funny because people don't tend to understand the profession. They're like, well, aren't you just burnt out of dealing with trauma? And you're like, oh no, it's just this specific niche trauma. Like, I could go over here and be just fine with this trauma.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean,
Like,
honestly, that was where I was at right at the beginning of the pandemic because I had put in my notice and was leaving. My last day was March 13th, and that was the day lockdown started. And I actually
wow.
missed my last day because I got a fever and then I got COVID.
Perfect.
I got COVID from one of my families, and I got a call a week into having COVID, and it was my former boss who said one of your families tested positive for COVID, and I was like, I
Mm,
know.
I'm
I'm sick as
feeling
a
it.
dog. There is no test right now. So then I had to like get approval for a test and all that stuff. But so you were going to be working in a hospital and then all the hospitals locked up. So you
That's
had to
exactly
pivot.
like I was like mid hiring process. They were about to hire me. It was like
Oh,
in April. And like COVID was already happening, right? Like the shutdowns were already happening, but it looked like they had already started the hiring process. It looked like things were going to be fine. And then it went into like a secondary kind of lockdown and of the
yeah.
hospitals were not going like it was at the point where we knew, wait a second, this is going to last longer. Um
Which
and
is
at
kind
that
of heartbreaking because child cancer doesn't stop. So you
right.
just stop having the professional there to help them with the child cancer.
Yes, right. So like I wasn't even licensed in the state I'm living in, right? Like I was finishing up, we were about to move. I was licensed in the state I was about to move to with the job
Oh
I was
wow.
about to get. And then they called me and they were like, "Please apply again when we open this back up. We
Wow.
just can't hire anyone. We have to shut down hiring right now." And so I kind of had to take some time and pivot to something else. And, with the pandemic, it's also like, okay, well, what's even available? you know,
Exactly.
what
I
is
mean,
even
that was
available?
where I was like, I can't. I didn't want to be a licensed professional counselor. I wanted to stay in the field of advocacy and education. But what can you do telehealth when because I mean, I'm
Right.
immunocompromised. So it's like, I
Right.
cannot go to an office and see people face to face. Like, it's just not going to be a good plan. And I can't be unemployed for multiple years. Hopefully not. So,
Right. Right. And
and then
at
of
the
course,
time, like we had my
yeah,
mom living with us and she has MS. So then,
yeah,
she's immunocompromised. And so I'm having to look at like, okay, well, I don't just need any job. I need a job to make sure that like I can protect her as well. Because I'm not going to bring that home. And she's a teacher and they were teaching, over their
remotely.
computers at that point. And we didn't know what the future was going to hold. But I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just exposing her, right? And then we had
Okay.
a 1.5-year old, and I was pregnant. And so, you have all those pieces on top of that. It was
Yeah.
a lot trying to
So,
find. I was thankful I found telehealth. Like, I was able to move into therapy.
and what was that process like having a little one at home? Did you want to work with parents? Did you want to work with whoever you were able to work with because it was a financial issue? Did you have a goal in mind of what kind of therapy you wanted to be doing?
Yeah. So I love working with teenagers. I like they are just so fun to me. They're coming into their own, they're exploring the world. They have their own thoughts and opinions and they just want someone to listen. Like
Yeah.
90% of the time they just want someone to listen.
They're
Um
toddlers with context, and that's what I love about them. They
yes,
have the
yes.
same creativity and impulsivity, but they can communicate to you the why behind it. And
Right.
it's so fun. It's like reading fiction books,
Yes.
but they're real
Right.
people.
And I like yeah, so like teenagers and young adults, I'm all about them. I am so like excited as they discover who they are. Like that is just such a fun like it is not a fun time of life, right? Like most of us were miserable at some point trying to discover who we were. And I think
Amen.
that that's why it's like so fun to me because I'm like you are getting to be the person you want to be and I am here for that and I know it's not fun, but you are discovering who you are. And so, but the big hurdle is not what population I want to work with, it's what my company allows me to work with, right? Because they
Oh,
have a
yeah.
queue, especially with the pandemic. The list was miles long of people
Oh,
who
I
needed
believe it
therapy.
because we were trying to move and we needed to get my daughter, continuity of care. And she had
Right.
been with her same therapist for 3 years at that point. And so,
Oh,
he was highly invested in helping us find someone. And I was like, I hate to report every week to you that there are 4-month waiting lists. So, I mean, we had to start in
right.
August and we weren't moving until January.
Right.
And we were like,
Right.
please let us be on the list.
Put us on there and we're going to see which one of you we like, right? Because and that is the big thing about therapy, like, and that's the way I always approached my clients is this may not be a fit, like I might not be the right therapist for you.
Yeah.
And I think it was so important to teach especially kids and teenagers that they have that autonomy, like please know, because I think a lot of them are like, oh, I'm going to therapy and my mom said I had to, or oh, I want to go, but they don't know that they have the freedom to be like, I
Yeah.
don't know that your personality is a fit for me or that this is working. And so I always encourage them, like, it's not, you have the freedom to choose who you want to work with. If you
And
don't feel
that's
comfortable with me, you're not going to make any progress. And that's why you're here. Like,
That's so rare because that's one reason that I wanted literally to start working for myself because in both the shelter um, environment and the in-home services environment, you are assigned cases.
yeah,
Even if you have specialties, like I did really well working with suicidal individuals.
right,
I did not do well working with aggressive individuals. I had
right,
experienced an attack at one point early in my in-home services, and so
mhm,
I was afraid of
right,
some of these children, and that is not a good relationship. Like you cannot build trust with someone if you're flinching, and it
right,
really I mean, I would go and advocate of like, it's not even that I want to switch for myself. It's that this child deserves someone who can see them in a much more positive regard than I can.
Right. Right.
And
And that's
so,
what
like,
like
that's huge that you're teaching that at that age, because I so completely wish that every provider had that conversation.
and I think it's so important because, you know, what is the point of being there? What is the point of wasting their time and your time if they're not comfortable? And I don't know. It was so vital to me that I set up parameters of safety so that they felt, and I told them, I was like, this is not about me. Like, my feelings will not be hurt because, and it doesn't matter. Like, my feelings will not be hurt because I want you to be in a place that you feel safest.
Yeah.
And that's not about me. Like, that is literally not about me. It doesn't matter. It's not like,
And
it's about them and their
PSA,
ability to grow.
if a provider says that you're hurting their feelings by not wanting to work with them anymore,
Oh my
you've made the
gosh.
correct choice.
And not working.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
It's like, that is a big, I mean, my daughter, when she went to college, transitioned therapy.
Mm,
And I sat there the whole time, like, I swear to God, if her therapist says that, because her therapist had some weird boundary things, that's kind of, we moved to a more rural area. It was an older woman.
right.
There was a clash. My daughter does really well with male therapists, and we tried
Right.
really hard to get her in with one. It was kind of a, band-aid on a bullet wound. But I was ready. I was like, if I find out that you cross this boundary, I'm
Yes.
coming for you. So that's such an important thing to teach your clients. I
Right.
love
And
that.
I think, as parents, that's an important thing to tell your kids too. Like,
Yes.
please tell me if you do not feel safe or happy with this person because there are other people out there and it may take some time. And if you want to stay with this person until we find someone else, that's fine. But I mean, that's so
Yeah.
important to respect your child's feelings of safety, right? Like, you wouldn't put
Yeah.
them in a parking lot and when they're little and just be like, oh, yeah, you're safe as cars are zooming
Yeah.
around them and they're like, Mom, I don't feel safe, right? Like, why would you do that to
Yes.
them emotionally? Why would you put them
Yes.
in an unsafe place emotionally?
And
So,
also, what a great opportunity to model, like, for the rest of their lives, like the ending of relationships or the holding of boundaries.
mhm,
Breaking up with a therapist is the ending of a relationship, it is breaking
right,
up. And so, even if you don't feel like your child is at the place where they can have that conversation, bring them into the conversation.
right,
I had so many, when I put in my resignation. And it was pre-pandemic, so all of my kids got broken up with by me. Like, I broke up with the moms, I
right,
broke up with the families. I was
Ugh,
like, I am leaving. And of course, it's a little bit easier
right,
when you're leaving the field, because you
right,
can say, like, I enjoyed my time with you guys, but I'm leaving the field for personal reasons. um but
right.
even
And I
then,
had
like,
that, which was nice.
yeah, having to switch having to switch because of other reasons is ugly,
Right,
and can be really ugly. And I think bringing modeling that is really important. Even when I had
right,
parents who didn't do it correctly, you as a professional have the opportunity to model it. And so why wouldn't you want
right,
to do that with your kids and teach them how to do that as an adult? Because
right,
they're raising adults, people.
right.
Like, I've always said
Yes.
that if you have a problem with Karens and you're an adult, you need to take that to heart. Like, start, like the whole, like, you hate Karens thing, like, that's on the
Right.
internet. Like, I'm always like, okay, then here's your opportunity to change it. Like,
Right. Don't
you're a
make one.
parent now. Don't make one.
Right.
If you have a problem and this is as a mother of boys, and you have a boy as well, like, if you wholeheartedly believe that sexual assault needs to be ended in America, you're raising a child. Not only
Right.
can you teach him to respect consent, you can also teach him to hold other men accountable.
Oh
And
man, we could have a whole conversation on what I'm
you
doing
know
with my
what?
boy.
April is sexual assault awareness. You're coming back. We're
Okay.
doing it. It's happening. I'm going to put it into the airwaves right now. This is happening. Um
Yes.
because that is an important conversation, and I get really
Right.
frustrated with people who have both boys and girls, and they teach their girls one thing and they don't do anything with their boys, and
Oh
I'm
my
just like, I will fight you. Um in a non-violent educational way. I will
god.
fight
Right,
you.
exactly.
Um So anyways, back to you're trying to work with teenagers. Obviously, you're getting handed off of the queue. What what did that
Well,
look like for you?
um, well, a lot of my clients were teenagers. I was very fortunate. So
Awesome.
the company that I worked for also worked with the um, online education system in Oklahoma.
I have a question. I just heard your daughter. Do you need to pause for a second? Or are they okay?
Oh, I know what it is. Sorry, the monitor is on. Okay.
Oh, no, that's totally fine. I just was like, is there a smackdown happening at your house?
No, no, they're
Okay.
playing like hide and go seek or something. Um,
Oh,
right.
I love that. It is nice when the older one can kind of,
I
like
know.
we always have the conversation with my 5-year-old of like, if someone is bleeding, you come running in here. If your
Yes.
brother turns purple, you come running in here. If he steals your toy, try some conflict management.
Right. Oh man, I'm telling you, we are working on that right now. Um,
Sorry to
but
interrupt you.
no, you're good. I'm glad. Thank you. Um, no, so a lot of I'm really fortunate in that we were working with the school system, online schooling system, and so a lot of my clients were through that. So I was getting a lot of teenagers. I did get a
Awesome.
few like little kids trying to do telehealth,
Oh my
and
goodness.
had never done it before, right? Like, or teletherapy, and had never done it before. And that was so hard. And
Yeah.
they're not, and they're never in an optimal situation, right? Because they're 5 years old. They're being told to sit in front of a computer, and generally there's like 15 other people in their household walking in and out.
Yeah. But also, like, from a, 90s kid perspective, here, talk to the lady on the internet about your problems.
Right? Like, it
Like,
was very strange, and it was very it wasn't conducive. Like,
no.
it yeah.
That's fascinating. That's super fascinating. Um
So,
so as a parent, because this is where the rubber hits the road. The water hits the
yes.
road. Oh, interesting. Um as a parent, you've worked as a casa, you've worked as a therapist, you've worked as a teacher. If you could distill down wisdom, even for yourself as before you were a parent, or even as, a professional for parents, or even veteran parents,
Mhm.
do you think that there is something that you would pass on?
Oh gosh.
Let's
Um,
try, that's a really broad question. Let's try you with a 6-month old. When your daughter was 6 months old, is there something that you wish you could tell you, previous you?
uh, my goodness. I would say, right, like, you're never going to be the parent you think you're going to be, right? Like, we all
Yeah.
have this ideal imagery of the parent you're going to be. You're like, oh, when I'm a parent, you're going to do that. And I've never been the person that was like, well, when I'm a parent, I'm not going to do that. Like, I mind my own business for the most part, so I don't really care what other people are doing. It
Valid.
was definitely just like, I know I love my kids. I know, like, there are certain things I want to do with them and certain traditions I want to have. And this is, like, generally how I want our days to look and how I'm going to speak to them. And
Yeah.
I would say you're
Did
never
that
going to.
change? Did that change from high school to as an educated professional? Because mine did. I mean, as in high school, I had this view of myself as a mother that was really radically informed as I went through college and learned more about
Right,
psychology and learned more about trauma and learned more about, um, just how children develop. But then in
right,
real world practice as a professional, that even modified it even more. And
right.
I would say the two of them really balanced each other. It was very much so a give and take of my perspective. Did you have that experience?
I think that one's kind of hard to separate for me because I was a completely different person at that time.
That's valid.
Um, so it's kind of hard to separate like what I thought I would be as a parent. But I will say that even as a professional, maybe this is like an easier way for me to put it. There's a lot of stuff that I cognitively know that is difficult for me to put into practice
Oh,
because,
real.
like,
So
not only is
real.
it difficult for me to put into practice because it doesn't come to mind in the moment, but it's also difficult for me to put into practice because all of these ideas of what I thought I would be as a parent discounted the fact that I had to be an adult person who regulated my own emotions.
Oh, there it is.
And
There
so, like,
it
right? So I think about all the time, well, yeah, I could easily be that parent if I knew how to properly regulate all of my emotions all of the time. And
is.
so it's
Meaning
one
that
of
you
the,
weren't a human. That means you're
right,
not a human parent.
exactly. Exactly. And so I think it's one of those things where I kind of have to take that into account, right? Like, oh yeah, I will respond calmly and, talk this through. Like, God bless her, my 4-year-old is just at a point where whining is like a big thing.
Mm.
And she has been a very like easy kid um, so far. And that is because she's a very lawful kid, right? Like, if you tell her not to do something, she won't do it. She follows the rules. And so she's been very easy so
So
far. And
you
she's,
gave birth to a small version of my sister.
yes, yeah. And even like a small version of
Of
me for the most
yourself,
part.
because you
Yeah.
two are very, both you and my sister, and of course we haven't clarified this on the podcast, but like you were roommates in
Right.
college, and
Right.
like you are both very lawful individuals. Like you can draw the
Yes.
line and you can stay in the line. And
Right.
so I love that you have created a small version of that, but I
Right.
can
And
also see
so,
where that's kind of hard.
right. And it is like, it's very funny because I feel like I fall somewhere between you and your sister
Oh, you
of
do.
like personality wise. And so, yeah, but she's been so lawful. And then now she starts this whining thing, and I can't explain it. To me, that is very sensory, like overwhelming, and I
Yeah.
don't handle it well. And so, my reaction, because I don't know how to handle that, is anger, right? Like,
Ooh, yeah.
which is such a common reaction, right? Like when we see that people don't know how to process something, anger is a very common side effect of not knowing how to process something.
Yeah.
And so that has been very difficult for me because in my mind, right? Like if I play back the situation later, I'm like, okay, well, I'll just be patient with her and weather the storm as she cries it out because that's what she needs to do. But as I'm sitting there in the moment, I just so desperately want it to stop that I'm trying to play logistics with a 4-year-old whose brain is like very
Not
much in early
happening.
development.
Yeah.
And so it just doesn't work, right? Like she is not accessed that part of her brain because she is in hysterics, whatever it may be, and it's totally understandable because she doesn't know how to manage her emotions. And
Yeah.
then she has someone who doesn't know how to manage her emotions trying to handle the situation. And so
Yeah.
I think so much of it is like, yes, I had this idealized version of parenthood that just completely neglected that I have feelings too.
Yes, that's so real. And being triggered by your kids is such an important topic. And actually, so my sister, when she's back from her grand adventures, um, we do have an episode planned where we talk about elected trauma of parenting,
Mhm.
because there is this dialogue happening right now where being triggered by your children is something that you have to honor within yourself, but also acknowledge that by stepping into parenthood, it is something that's going to happen. So your children are
Right.
not attacking you, but you can still feel traumatized and attacked. And there's
Yes.
this, it's not on them and it's not necessarily fully on you. Like this is just happening, it's occurring. And it's
Right.
the term that we use so much in parent education is elected trauma, meaning you did choose this, but you also knew to some degree, and maybe not very much,
Right.
how this could be a hard road. I mean, you hear people say all the time, like, are you sure you're ready to have kids? That's 18 years of your life. But the 18 years isn't necessarily the hard part. It's the 2 hours a day where you can't get them to stop screaming and you're
Right.
simultaneously worried about your eardrums busting and them hyperventilating.
Right.
And so you're like, please stop, 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 stop. And I I love to look up another one of my really stupid hobbies is I love to look up like anthropologically how other mothers in like the animal clinic and the animal kingdom
Mhm.
handle it because whining is biological across baby mammals. Like they
Right.
whine because they want you to fix something for them.
Right.
But there are so many videos. All you have to do is type in like mother gorilla snapping at baby or mother lion snapping at baby. Like across the board, adults get tired of children whining. It's
Right.
hard. It's biologically ingrained in us to make the whining stop. And the idea behind that is you're motivated to get your child whatever they need so that they will stop whining. So, like, hey,
Right.
mom, you have to get off the couch to feed your baby. Hey, mama lion, you need to go get food to feed your baby. They're all
Right.
whining because they need it. But also, kids whine about the blue cup versus the green cup. And at that
Right.
point, it's not a biological need, but they don't know how to
Right.
communicate the difference between that. And so,
Right.
I think
Well, and
that's
I don't
such
even
an
think they
important.
fully understand need and want a lot at this,
Oh
at
no.
this
Yeah, it's
stage.
just they just communicate everything.
Right.
And I mean, it's really it's fascinating. And I think that like from again like a mammalian
Mhm.
thing, there is there is a village. There's a unity across motherhood in all of mammals, which is like please stop whining tiny tiny thing.
Right.
Um
Universal
but you're
experience. What else do you want from me?
yes, exactly. But also, you're right. Like that is such a big thing. And I'm glad that we're having so many conversations in like the parent sphere of like emotion regulation. And you're right.
Mm.
Like I have so many thoughts in my head at the beginning of the day of, yesterday was a time change. I mean, I don't know when this episode's coming out, but
Right.
yesterday was spring forward. We lost an hour of sleep. We did. And
Right.
I knew going into it, I had prepped other parents, I had prepared myself, I had talked to my husband. We knew toddlers are they handle the time change poorly. They don't
Right.
understand what's happening. You're attempting to keep some semblance of a routine, even if you're shifting by half hour or hour or whatever. They have circadian rhythms, and the circadian rhythm has been changed because of
Right.
stupid humanity. And I think it was Ben Franklin, and we can blame him. But um, we we still, my husband and I looked at each other 30 minutes into a 2-year-old meltdown about bedtime and finally dawned on us we were sending him to bed an hour early. And of course he wasn't tired. Of
Right.
course his 8:30 here was 7:30 in his brain. And he
Right.
was like, "What did I do wrong? Why am I going to bed early? I'm not tired.
Oh.
I'm going to jump on the bed." And we were
Right.
like, "Stop jumping on the bed. It's 8:30. You're going to be exhausted tomorrow. Your mom needs to get up and work. Your dad needs to get up and work. What are you doing?"
Right.
Um
And he's like, I
and
don't know. I didn't do anything wrong. My body just tells me
exactly.
to be awake.
And so we both, like my husband and I just had this moment where we looked at each other and we were like, "Time change." And so
Mhm.
literally we both sat down on the floor with him and we were like, "You're right, buddy. It's not bedtime. We're going to try to do bedtime soon because now you've had a tantrum and you've worn yourself out. But you're right. Let's sit down and read some more books because
Right.
we have totally messed this up." And I think you know this as someone who's worked for so long in the mental health field. The repair is what matters.
Yeah.
The 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 dysregulation is always going to happen. It is constant. You are always in
Right.
a state of changing how you're able to regulate. But consistent repair is what I wish we could. That's the next step of this evolution. We're
Right.
getting parents to recognize, okay, you're dysregulated. You're triggered. This is
Right.
happening. And that's okay. Like we're trying to get out of that shame cycle.
Right.
But the next skill has to be that consistent, clear repair with your child so that they understand that it's not necessarily their fault and also not necessarily the parents' fault. There's just a thing that happened, and mommy is very sorry because mommy did
Right.
not remember that there was a time change and that your body is on a different time than everyone else's. because
And
you're a toddler.
that's so important. I try and just have
And
those
that's,
real conversations with my 4-year-old.
yes.
I made a mistake. I should not have done that. I need to work on, like, I'm honest with her. I need to work on that. Like,
Yeah.
there are certain times where I'm just like very clear with her of I need to work on that. And there are other times where I also have the conversation with her of like, okay, this was both of us, right? Like,
Hmm.
I didn't regulate myself well, but you also didn't do the one thing I had asked you to do 35 times.
Yep.
Um, and then you got in trouble for it. And so there's definitely like a I try and help her understand my responsibility in my actions and her responsibility in, how things can escalate or how these things happen. Because in reality, I'm not the only person she's ever going to be around, right? Like, she's going to be
Yes.
around a teacher someday and she's going to push a teacher past the brink, or her class will push her teacher past the brink. And so she still needs to understand how things escalate and her responsibility in that, while I acknowledge my responsibility in becoming dysregulated and losing it, right?
Can
Like,
I can I tell you that we recently had a problem with our 5.5-year-old, almost 6-year-old at school, um, because he reported that a quote bad kid um pushed him up against the wall. And he did. He had a scratch on his cheek. And we were like, huh, okay. We'd like to know a little bit more about this. So we emailed the teacher. We were like, because he split households. So I guess the teacher had communicated with his mother who picked him up at
right,
the time. Um, and so we were like, we would like a little bit more context about what happened, especially because we really do not use the language bad kid. And that is
right,
something that his other household tends to do, is they're kind of like, we've noticed before, like, oh, those are the bad kids on the playground. Or he'll say, like, I don't play with this person at school. They're a bad kid. We don't use any of that language. And so
right.
we know that it's coming from somewhere else. Um, and so we kind of reached out to the teacher, and the teacher was like, yes. We did have a friend at school who shoved your son up against the wall. However, maybe a conversation can be had, because what our child did was look at this child's lunch tray and go, "Ugh, you're so disgusting for eating that disgusting food. You're
Oh my
gross."
gosh.
And so
No.
then, as parents, the
You get what you
conversation
pay for,
was,
kid.
I mean, yeah, like, let's talk about a little bit of humility and accountability for our actions. Like, that kid shoved you. And so then we got to have a secondary conversation of like, wow, it really hurt your feelings when your friend shoved you up against the wall.
Right.
But can you imagine that it also hurt his feelings because you gagged at his food and said it was disgusting?
Right. Okay, that is fantastic. And a good
Right?
reminder that in some ways empathy is taught.
Yes, exactly. And I think, like, for me, oh my goodness, such an important thing, because he does have some sensory stuff. He is really specific around food. And he does make really bad comments about food. Like, he will tell me regularly that the food I cook is disgusting. And we have those corrective conversations. But
Right.
sometimes it's a little triggering for me. Sometimes he will
Right.
gag at food. I sit in front of him and I'm like, you have been screaming that you're hungry for half an hour. Here is
Right.
food. Eat the food. You know, um, and so for me, it was a little validating, because it was
Right.
like, we're not wrong for the corrective action that we're taking at home when we say, we don't talk to people like that.
Right.
You can say, no, thank you. You can say, I don't think I'm going to eat that right now. You can put it on your no thank you napkin, because we do have like a little napkin that we put next to his plate. And we're
Yeah.
like, you can put it on your no thank you napkin. But what you're not going to do is sit here and make gagging noises. You're not going to call people disgusting. You're not going to
Right.
disrupt the meal at large.
Yeah.
Um, and so it was this. I hate to say it, but like, I had a little moment where I was like, aha, I'm
No,
not the
it is
only
vindication.
person. Yes. And
It
it's
is.
like, and then I take a step back and I'm like, but this is a 5.5-year-old who was shoved against a wall, and that would be frightening
Yes.
for anyone. So we're going to,
Yes.
we're going to comfort. We're going to talk about that. We're going to get a band-aid for your little tiny scratch.
Right.
And, we followed up with the teacher of like, thank you so much for that context. That's really helpful. We are going to kind of correct the conversation around his friend being the bad kid, because he's not a bad kid. He just
Right.
reacted in the moment. And I
Well,
think
yeah, yeah.
we could apply that to ourselves as parents. Like, we're not a bad kid or a bad mom
Right.
when we have emotions. And so neither are the other kids at school. And I do get
Right.
up in arms about that sometimes with parents I work with who will use language like that towards children, or will say like, well, that child just
Yes.
hasn't been taught. And it's like, you're saying that, you're acknowledging that the child does not necessarily have the onus on them to understand how to regulate or how to behave in public, but you're
Right.
also blaming them. And
Yeah.
that's a very two-sided thing. And I think as professionals, you and I have both probably seen that,
Right.
where
And I think it's like, it's so interesting because I think talking about this, it reminds me that there are certain things where we tell our kids no once and it's done. Like they won't ever do it again. And we want everything to be that sprint, but there are so many things that are a marathon and it is tiring. And
yes,
we view our kids, not all the time, but we give our own children that grace. And who knows, that kid might have been told that might be his marathon, right? Like, don't
hmm,
shove people. We don't do that.
actually the
And
teacher came
so,
back and said like, so we've been working on not putting our hands on others with that child, like
right.
this has
So, and
happened
that's like,
before.
that's
And
his
it was,
marathon. And so,
yes,
he's not a bad kid. He just has a different marathon than your child. Like, he has a
yes.
different thing that he's going through.
And I wouldn't say that one is worse than the other. I know that I have a couple of co-parents who would probably disagree with that. But um for me, like, they can both be as damaging. Like,
Right.
yeah,
And
one
they're
of them is
different
putting
manifestations
hands.
sometimes of the same thing, right? The
Exactly.
dysregulation.
Yes. And so, even amongst co-parents, even with my, my partner, my husband, he is an amazing father,
Mhm.
but um he can sit in the same room with one of our kids throwing a tantrum and not be bothered by it. Like, he
Ooh,
has this incredible ability to just zone out. And I'm like, I will
I'm
catch
jealous.
myself. I will catch myself getting dysregulated of like, why can't you make that stop? And I know
Right,
logically, like, he has probably checked that everything is safe. He has probably checked that there's nothing he can do. And he's probably
right,
just waiting a beat to see if they can use skills that we've taught them.
right,
Because often even just the 2-year-old will tell you, he'll like hit you and then he'll say, ow, sorry. And then he'll go, no hit, and he'll walk away. And you're like, you couldn't prevent yourself from hitting the first time, but you did the second time.
right.
You did it.
I guess yeah. You have the tools. We'll just wait till you
Mm,
start employing them before the action.
yes, exactly. My favorite thing is that he screams ow as he hits you. It is not great, but he goes ow and hits you as hard as he can. And I'm just like, that is not how that works. But as he gets older and learns the language for it, we can say like, we don't ow people. Like, he doesn't know what
Right,
hitting is, but he knows
right,
like, oh, we don't make people say ow. Like, if someone's saying
right,
ow, you've done something wrong.
right.
And I think that's going to lay a nice foundation. I'm trying to remind myself of that. But
Here's
yeah,
one
like,
you'll. I
it's,
feel like you'll. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
well, no, I was just going to say, like, I think it's interesting how different things impact different, like, co-parents. And, like,
Yeah.
even, like, I can almost become more triggered less by the tantrum, but more about how my husband's handling it better than I
Right.
am. Because I'm like, my
Yes. Isn't that
skin,
a fun part of co-parenting?
I'm like, my skin is crawling. How are you sitting there? And it, like, it's
Right.
almost, then I become dysregulated as a partner and as a parent.
Right.
And
Right.
then you got to repair twice. Yay. Go
Yes.
team.
And I think, yeah, and that is also very important, right? Like, if you want your relationship to last, you have to repair with your partner too. Like, those are important conversations to have. But I feel like you'll appreciate this. From when my 4 year old was itty bitty, um, she, we taught her to take deep breaths when she was upset. And when she was little, it always worked for her. She's 4
Yeah.
now.
Nope. No deep breaths now.
No deep breaths. She is like, what, right? We're millennials, right? She's like this, the emo kid that just so deeply wants to feel her emotions that, like,
Oh,
if
bless
you
her.
try and help her regulate, she like it's rejection. She does not want that. She wants to feel those emotions. She wants that well deep. And so it's really funny to me because I'm like, I've taught you all the tools. Why aren't you using them, right? But I mean,
And she's
she's
like,
not.
"I have the tools lined up on my shelf, Mom. I'm not
Yeah,
grabbing
she's
them
like,
for a
I
reason."
have them. I know I can do this. I don't want to. I want to feel. And it's so funny because
Oh,
it's like right, like you and I have probably taught tools of emotional regulation from a much earlier age than a lot of people tend to start. And that's just because we work in the field we worked in. Um, but that can only get them so far. And we can't deny them feeling their emotions, right? Like, I'm not trying to cut her
yeah.
off from feeling her emotions, but that's how it feels to her. She wants to feel that. She wants to kind of wallow in it. And so it's really funny because I'm like,
Yes.
I've taught you the tools. Why would you use them? But,
That's
you know,
so
she's still her own
interesting.
person, right? Like, she still wants to do her own thing and feel the way she feels. And I find it so funny because I'm like, okay, well, why, why did I even waste my time teaching a 1-year old this?
Yeah. But that's so interesting because there is a dialogue right now in the parenting sphere where, we're working on don't just say it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. When your child falls, let
Right.
them have that. But there isn't as much of a dialogue of like, let your child have their anger. Let them
Yes.
be mad. Let your child um squeal with joy publicly in a restaurant because someone
Yes.
has handed them macaroni and cheese.
Right.
Let your child cry in Walmart because they do want that toy and you have explained that they can't have it and it is all right for them to be sad,
Yes.
and you
Oh,
can say, wow, you're so sad, I'm sad, I can't get it for you right now. um
right.
and I think there's such a good conversation right now about honoring those feelings, but it is so hard to do in the moment. It is
Right. And
so
especially in a
hard.
public setting with eyes on
Yes.
you. And I
Yes.
think, especially, and I don't think this is exclusive to the age of the eyes. um, but especially, depending upon the crowd that you're around and how old they are.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I tend to let my kids feel how they feel. And if they're, there have been moments where I felt a little bit of embarrassment because there are certain social situations where I'm like, okay, well, we need to be quiet now, or this is
Like
a
when
place
you're
where
in front of
we're
grandparents.
no, no, I
That's
don't really
mine.
care what they think. No, no, mine's like at the library where I'm like, no, you
Oh,
really can't do
yes.
that. These are shelves we don't play on because they're big kid books, right? And or they're adult books. So why don't we go back over to the kids section? And then that causes a tantrum, right? Like the library is supposed to be a quiet place. I'm disturbing the peace at that point,
Yes.
and I am responsible for that little person. But at the same time, so and I think that that's where that good boundary setting is of like, okay,
Yeah.
you are allowed to feel, but you have to remember that you can't make other people miserable. And like
I
I don't know how to express it all of the time. um like my 4-year-old loves to cry as loudly as possible, and
yes,
I'm
cuz
like,
she's
okay,
like, everyone needs to know I'm feeling
yes,
this.
she's a
She's like,
whaler,
I'm
right?
communicating this.
she
Listen here, people.
she could be employed at funerals. Like, if you need a whaler, I got you.
Oh, love
Um,
that.
but and which is fine until either I become dysregulated or like her brother's trying to sleep, right? And those are
Yes, we've had
times.
that one.
Oh,
We've had that one, especially with like the military this last summer where my husband was gone for multiple months at a time. We would go and visit him on base. And like, first off, everything is under your husband or the military personnel's name. And
right.
second off, they can get write ups for their families disturbing the peace. And
Wow.
so like
Oh
you
my
are
gosh.
prepped as a spouse, like, and of course we do have a child who has sensory
Yes.
issues. And then of course I also have a baby at that time. I had a one
Right.
year old at that time. And so we would have like overtired nap time in a hotel room with sensory dysregulation,
Right.
and we got we had to leave. I had to go sit in my car at one point because we had housekeeping knock on the door and was like, I'm so sorry, but you have to leave the hotel because you could get your husband in trouble right now.
My
And so
gosh.
like we spent like it on in July, we spent like 3 hours running the air conditioning in my car
Right.
while both boys were just melting down, and I was doing everything I could. But it was literally this really eye-opening experience for me about teaching your child to operate in society and what that
Yes.
looks like. And I ended up adding a whole section to my education course for that preschool age of like, how can you have a conversation with your child about home rules versus society rules, and
Right.
how to be true to yourself while also honoring society's rules, like
Right.
at home, we can punch a pillow if we're mad. However, if we're in a furniture store, they may not want you to punch their pillow.
Right.
Like, and that's a really small example, but, you know, there's something to that. If
Right.
you cook with me at home, but we go out on a special occasion for someone's birthday and we're at a hibachi place, that person is not going to let you cook with them.
Right.
And you're going to have to respect that.
Right.
And so I love the library example because you're completely right. Like, we are trained in our society.
Right.
Libraries are quiet. You respect
Yeah.
other people, even though every other person in that children's section of the library understands that children are children. And if they don't, they
Right.
can get out.
Right.
But we've had so many times where the librarian has come up to us and said, "It's okay. I know you're stressing about this. It's okay." And I love our
Right.
librarian for that. But
Right.
we've had just as many times where somebody has been like, "Shh," at us.
Yes.
And we're
Yeah.
like, "No."
Right. And I would say like my kids are generally like I'm very grateful that they are like lawful children, right? Like I said. And so I can get away with a lot. I'm like
Mine
very
are
fortunate in that
Mine are
sense.
tiny chaos demons. That's why I keep them at home. That's what I always say. I mean, I hate, like, I don't really believe the angels demons
Right.
conversation, but I have always said, like, my youngest in particular is a tiny chaos demon, and that is just because, like, he just exists. I mean, he's a tiny Tasmanian devil, and he gets it
Right.
from me and his father. He took the two chaotic parts of us and put it together as his entire personality.
Yeah.
Um, and because of that, we are working on outlets of like, we can't go to library story time right now.
Right.
But we
Yeah.
can go to the playground and play with lots of other kids because
Right.
we can be loud there, and I think
Right.
parenting in a lot of ways is guiding your child through those things, because
Yes. Yeah.
eventually we are going to go back to the library.
Right.
We are taking a small break right now so that we can learn, but when brother's here, he loves to go to the library. And
Right.
so we're not going to have one child's behavior prevent the other one. But at the same time,
Right.
like, I love that you have two children who are relatively similar, because I have three children who are 1000% different people. And that is awesome.
Right.
But I love it from a parenting education perspective, because now I feel
Right.
like I'm even more exposed to the ways that you have to parent different people. And it's constant continuing education credits. But
Yes. Oh my gosh.
it is, there's this really interesting flexibility that you have to have as your child is learning how to be a person. I spoke to a
Right.
parent the other day who was like, "Do all toddlers do this?" And I was like, "Yes." Because
Right.
and they were like, "Why?" And I was like, "Your child is a year and a half old. They are an alien on this planet. They are an alien. They are a small human, yes, but they don't know how to be a small human. They are an alien who hasn't even been walking half their life, hasn't even been eating real food half their life. Like, they're not only is we talk so much about brains not being properly formed and developed yet, but like, even your regulatory system, your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems are part of your brain, but also all of your nerve endings aren't used to things. That's why children are so susceptible to cold and hot and things like that, because your nerves and your muscles and your skin and I always like to remind that I have a friend who's a NICU nurse, and she always talks about like explaining to parents, like, don't put a band-aid on your neonatal's skin. Like your newborn cannot have regular adhesive band-aids because their skin is brand new to this world. Um, and I think applying that in so many ways to behavior and to parenting is so important. Like your child has only existed for 2 years. And for us as parents of kids who are about to have their second birthday is like, wow, they've been here for 2 years. This is so big. They're big boys. They're not babies anymore. But they've only existed for 2 years. Can you imagine, like, as someone who's been a yeah, as somebody who's been a therapist and giving advice, do you trust someone who says, "I've been working in the field for 10 years," or "I've been working in the field for 2 years?" You know, like, if you had a choice. And so there is this beauty to just acknowledging your little child alien and how they're learning about society and themselves. And I think that's so it's weird, man. It's really
Yeah,
weird.
I know. I feel like the greatest thing, um, well, I was thinking, like, you said yours are chaos agents, and I'm like, oh, my kids are so lawful good. One, I don't think that that's because of me. I think that's just their personalities
Oh, yeah,
right
it's
now,
ingrained. It's
right? Like,
100%
this
ingrained.
is who they are right now. And I think it's really funny. It's really easy to get a sense of like pride about that. But one, you didn't do that. That's just how they came
Mhm.
out in a lot of ways.
Yep.
But I think also like you have to stay humble because guess what? I really think, and I've heard a million parents say this, oh, they were such an easy baby and the hardest teenager. But my one that was a difficult baby was the easiest teenager. And who knows? Like, who knows how they're going to turn out? But I think,
I always think that that's a parenting thing. If you learned how to manage a difficult toddler, you know how to manage a difficult teenager. If you did
right.
not learn your own regulation and parenting skills during the toddler phase, because I will, having worked with both populations for so long, toddlers and teenagers are exactly the same. You will
Yes.
never
Yeah.
convince me. You will never convince me that they are not. They are
Well,
learning
you
about
had a
society
slow,
in different
easy
ways.
ride, right? Like,
Yeah.
you had the opportunity to learn, but you may not have known was an opportunity to learn
Yeah.
because your kid was so easy. And then all of a
Mhm.
sudden, when they stop, like, and I think the big thing is, why are they lawful good? And at what point do they start exploring that they don't have to be?
Yes,
And
that's such a good way to do it.
if you've been cruising because they have been good and easy, then all of the sudden, when it hits that they now have their independence and can choose
Mm.
to not be as lawful as they were before, when that hits at the same time and you've been on cruise control, I don't think a lot
Yes.
of people know how to handle that. And so
Mhm.
it is one of those
Well,
like, stay humble and make sure that you're still thinking about things.
well, and I will always be thankful for my period of time in home services because that's what that was. It was parents who had been, we had kind of frequent flyers, for lack of a better term, who we saw,
Right.
several times because their child had a disability or because they themselves needed extra help or because there was
Right.
court involvement. But we also had some cases that were referred from the hospital or from the police. And this was the very first time that their child had ever done anything or had ever
Right.
had anything happen to them. And so many parents were confused that my job was not to teach their child skills. My job was to teach them how to
Right.
parent their child through this. And that is the amount of times I answer the question, what is a parenting coach? Um and have to remind parents that you don't get a manual. There is not someone who takes a child out of your body and plugs in a USB and suddenly you have
Right.
all of these skills. It is a constant practice. Like you yourself said, you know in your brain what you're supposed to do.
Right.
We sat in college and took these tests. We
Right.
know what this is supposed to look like.
Right.
But putting it in practice in the moment, your brain is not flipping through, social psychology of children or
Right.
how do I recognize what's the difference between a tantrum and, a dysregulation as far as if you define a tantrum as like just
Right.
controlled, which that's a whole other conversation. But,
Right.
I think one of the most important perspectives as a parent is that you have only been a parent as long as your child is alive.
Right.
and giving yourself that grace. You know, if you have a 2-year-old, you have only been parenting for 2 years. You are
Right.
not expected to be an expert. However, you are expected to continue to practice, to continue to show up, to
Right.
continue to meet these challenges.
And keep
Um,
learning. I feel like the baby book phase
yes.
ends immediately, like
Oh
before
my
or after the
gosh.
baby's
Yes.
born. Please keep
I am
learning.
I am trying so hard to find the time, and I know that's laughable. I'm trying so hard to find the time to do like parenting book, like almost like shrink downs. One of my favorite things that I did was
Yes.
how to listen, or how to talk so kids will listen and listen so kids will talk, which they now have the little kid version of, which I am beyond excited. Shelby's reading it right now. Um, but it's for kids who are under the age of 6. And um, I love that book. I go
Yeah.
back and reread that book. Like, I go back and distill that book down. If we have someone who's going to take care of our children, I have a little printout of like, here's what I would like you to read. It's only one page, but
Right.
here's what we know works with our kid. You know, sometimes parents get made fun of for that. Sometimes parents get made fun of for, bringing out a binder and saying, here's how to take care of my kid in the way that suits their needs.
Right.
But I would almost rather have that conversation with a
Right.
parent who knows that than one who's like, I'm going to follow my instincts. Because the truth is, your instincts can betray you.
Yeah.
Your instincts can absolutely betray you, because the amount of times that my child has scratched or bitten my breast while I was breastfeeding, my
Right.
instinct is to throw that child. Like,
Yeah,
you can't
exactly.
listen, you cannot listen to your instincts in that moment. It will
Right.
lead you to a bad path. You have to halt every instinct you have to yeet that child.
Right.
um because I wish that there were so many more conversations about that, because the truth is that in the old days, and I know I have to let you go soon, but in the old days, there is this conversation of like, oh, you guys have all this newfangled books and all of these conversations and courses and things like that. But children learned how to parent at the knees of their parents.
Right.
We had villages. You had older siblings who parented and were at your house regularly, who you could see
Right.
parent and you could make a choice. I don't think I'm going to do that. I don't think I
Right.
want to do it this way. I love that you did that way. Why do you do it that way? There was
Right.
so much more communication. The concept of the village around like postpartum is a really great conversation. But
Right.
the concept of a village as a younger member of society is incredibly important.
Right.
Um, Around confidence, my daughter just got a job being an overnight nanny. And I thought when I had a mom friend reach out, and I thought when I offered her that job, it was going to be a cold no. Absolutely not. You cannot pay me enough to sit in a room, sit in a house with these children overnight. That's too much responsibility. And she goes, well, it's not any different than being in the house with my brothers.
Right.
She's like, I mean, I know you guys are there. She's like, but I've handled it before. Um, she's woken up with her brother before when she's the one that heard him first.
Mhm.
Or, there was this beautiful moment where he fell down the stairs. And he wasn't hurt at all because he had his comforter around him. So he was trying to
Right.
walk down the stairs with his comforter, and so he rolled down the stairs. But, she experienced that very critical moment of observation where she saw us panic. She saw
Right.
us regulate ourselves. She saw us do an assessment of triage. Is he injured? What happened? What does he need?
Right.
Do we need to call the doctor? Do we need to go to kind of this flow chart that as practiced parents we know to
Right.
do. And it boosted her own confidence of like, I
Right.
think that I can handle these types of situations as they come instead of being paralyzed in fear.
Right.
um, and I so wish that people who kind of neg, parenting courses and parenting education and parenting books and things like that, I so wish that they could remember that historically we had education. We've
Right.
always had parenting education. The difference is now that often it has to come from outside the family. And that's
Right.
okay.
And we have to be self-educated in a way we've never had to be before.
Exactly. And
So,
self-supporting, and that leads into a whole conversation around self-awareness. You
Yeah.
have to know when you have to ask for help. You have to
Right.
know.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and so anyways, I know we both, it's lunchtime. I got to get some lunch on the table. And I know you've got little ones needing your attention, but I thank you so much for talking with me and
Yeah.
filling in for sis. I know that she's going to be having a fun time, but
Yeah.
you're a really good mom and you're a really good social work therapist professional thingy that you are now as you move into next phases.
Yes. Thank you
But
so much. And you're a really good mom.
bye.
Enjoyed doing this with you. Bye.